People were like, for a day, getting glass particles out of their eyes. I guess it was early 1980. Yates set out through his newsletter, and I believe he did a mailing too to the Cannonball participants that he was doing this movie, and if you wanted to come down, they would pay you for the car every day, and they would pay you to be extras every day. They had a few of us show up. They would told us when to be down there. I believe it was sometime in early May, which in Atlanta at that time is not a bad time of year. My brother had our Lotus in Marietta, which is the suburb of Atlanta, because being a Lotus, it was at the dealer getting worked on, and the head had warped. Being a Lotus, it took forever. They were kind enough to flatbed it over for us to use it for the shoot. So, every day, time that they use it, we had to push it into the spot and just leave it there. It was a doorstop. It had already been set up pretty much. The cameras were there and the crews and everything. And we came in for basically, I believe it was the first 4 or 5 days. They had set us up in a hotel next to the main shooting. It was kind of strange because it was my first film experience. I had been in television for a few years at NBC in New York, and you get used to television production. It's boom, 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 boom. And if you're live, it's live. You go when you deal with it. You come down to a film set, and first of all, the egos were just outrageous. I mean, even the projectionist is like a star. You're told, what to do, who you can and cannot talk to. You give the stars a wide berth unless they seem friendly. So I passed the time mainly hanging out with the stunt people. It was fascinating seeing the cast of characters because these were some pretty amazing stars at the time. They had long histories in Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Roger Moore, the Dr. Jack Elam, who I'd seen growing up in all these fabulous Westerns, and it was just amazing. And of course, there was Burt and Dom, who was like the nicest person on the planet and always fun, had a good time. So, we were sitting around one night, and of course, there were some of the characters from the Cannonball there. There's, the Kovalevskis and the PRDA and, his crew. And we're hanging out in the bar one night, and shooting had pretty much wrapped. And Sammy and Dean are there in their priest outfits. And they just decided to start buying for everybody at the bar. So it was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And both of those guys couldn't have been nicer, very approachable. And even more so as the night got on. But the next day, it was just like another day back on the set. Another highlight was it had rained a good bit in May. They were setting up this great big crane shot with these lights to do the night scene. So it looked like it was sort of like moonlight, in the parking lot, and you could see everything around you. They couldn't get the crane just right, so they moved it out to the road, which was a pretty far reach. And then they put down some plywood, for the legs to put on it. And it wasn't that big of a crane. And they kept going up and up and up, and they're pretty much at full extension. And I was in the Lotus getting something at the time, and as you know, they're not the easiest car to get in and out of, even when you're skinny. I look up and I see Bob Kovalevsky from the PRDA. He looks up and he hits the deck. And I hear my brother yell, "Get down." And I couldn't get out of the car, so I dove across the tunnel, hoping maybe there would be some reinforcement around me if I had to. The crane toppled over with the lights and everything and just vaporized when it hit the pavement. It was like this fine glass powder, and Kovalevsky had contacts in his eyes, and people were like a day getting glass particles out of their eyes. So needless to say, that shut down the traffic for the night. But 2 cars down is where it came down, and it came down on top of a very nice red Cobra. And this thing was mint. Just missed the roll bar behind the driver and went right across the dash and out the other side of the car. I mean, it just smashed it. So yeah, and this was an actual Cobra. I believe it was a 427. I'm not sure. This car would be worth millions of dollars. I don't know if there's a Carfax on it, because they didn't have that back then. I think it was one of those deals where, a car gets wrecked and it disappears and quietly gets fixed and comes back and nobody knows anything. And the cables wound up on the red Ferrari 308 right next to it. And it just missed Terry's car, and it just missed my car. So fortunate, because I don't know what it would have done, had it hit the Lotus, and how much that would have caved, I don't know. So that was, an interesting little incident there. Just interesting watching how they coordinated the stunts, who was involved. I mean, Bobby Bass was the head stuntman on the show, who was legendary at the time. Apparently legendary for other things, as we found out later. They left afterwards because they only had Burt for 14 days or 15 days. He got $5 million for 15 days of work, which was a Hollywood record at the time. And they had to go shoot the West Coast scenes in the remaining 6 or 7 days that they had. So they just packed up and split. Lotus came and took the car back. They did what they had to do out there, and that's where Heidi got seriously hurt when she was in the Aston Martin. They were driving in and out of the traffic. They had done many takes. I don't know. From what I hear, it was probably like the 10th or 11th take, and it was hot as hell in the middle of the desert. Sooner or later, somebody screwed up on the timing. And Heidi, at the time, was supposed to be James's girlfriend, was sitting in, so they had a woman in the seat, but it's not, it's the English drive, so she was on the left-hand side. And she, at this point, was like, didn't have her belt on. She forgot it, whatever, It's a hot day, it's the end of the day. And the timing got screwed up, and they had a head-on. And she hit really bad, wound up being a quadriplegic because of it. It was amazing that she'd even lived. They came back in August, and it was like 117 in Atlanta. And the humidity was, 117%. We spent most of that time when we weren't standing around the cars up to our neck in the pool, just trying to stay cool, or in the bar or the game room. Anything that had air conditioning or wet relief. There was a pall that sort of fell over the crew, and you could feel it, it was palpable, and people were wondering how's she's going to do, what's going to happen to her next. It was really quite tragic, but it was interesting nonetheless. And then the problem when they came back was, the heat. And they actually had people passing out in the parking lot, standing around during the day. And again, Bobby Kozlowski saved the day. There was this one woman who was standing next to Hal, and suddenly she starts keeling right over, and Bob dives and catches her head just before it hits the pavement. So in hand, boom. Also, coming back the second time, Bobby's partner, Al Cibio, who he did the Cannonball with, had their Cannonball Z28 Camaro. And he picked me up. I got off of work at midnight, and he picked me up outside of Rockefeller Center. And we drove down to Atlanta. And again, there was no air conditioning because it was, a Z28. And so we're cranking with the windows down. And we get down to around, no problems, we're booking it. We get down to around Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And this is, a nice white Z28. And we come over the top of the hill, and there's a state trooper sitting there. And Al was driving. He jumps on the brake, and we were like the Millennium Falcon coming out of hyperspace. It's like, I'm sure the bumper was just about dragging. Apparently, I don't think the radar locked up in time, because I'm sure we were going 100, if not over. He started to follow us, and he was so pissed that he followed us for the next 20 miles. He would go off the off-ramps, come down behind us again. He was doing anything. He would crowd us, trying to push us over, and we were just not having it. We just I was keeping track on him, but we weren't looking in the rearview mirror. We weren't following. Finally, I think we got to the limit of his jurisdiction, and he pulled over and gave up. We were like, oh my God. But now we had to make up that time. We got down to Atlanta, no problems. It was just that one brush. And the other good thing was, interesting, is that at night, they took the most expensive cars and they locked them up in an armory, a National Guard armory, just, in the auditorium, just to make sure everything was under safekeeping. And one night, Terry Bernius, who had owned the Countach, said, why don't you take it? I'm going really? You let me drive? He goes, yeah. And this Countach was just so outrageous. He had 12 exhaust pipes coming out the back, one from each cylinder. It was, without a doubt, the fastest Countach that had ever been built at that time. And I believe it was just before Lamborghini went bankrupt the first time. So this was the last car that was out of the factory before they shut it down. This is going to be a tough one to replace, But I'm driving along, and he had it geared so it would clock close to 200 miles an hour. And I'm driving up the freeway, and I'm following the other people, and, I got it in the second gear, but first gear was 65 miles an hour. So, I never got it past second gear. And at that slower speed, you couldn't really tell how it handled and everything else, but I was just more impressed to be driving it. I wasn't analyzing, the upholstery or anything else. That was like, yeah, that was cool. Thanks, Terry. So yeah, that was, sort of a lot of Cannonball experiences that I had as an extra. You can actually see me in the driver's meeting scene standing behind Burt and Dom. I had my scraggly red beard and a blue and white hat on. They start this scene with the shot off to the right and they pan to the left where Burt and Dom was. When my brother was on the far shot on the right, he had a red and white hat. So it was like our claim to fame. I got my 7 seconds in. And, it was kind of interesting. It really was. And I knew from television, usually how they were going to block these things. And I could see where they had the camera set up. So I went and I got a spot standing on top of the curb. And they come and they bring Burt and Dom and they stick them right in front of me. And now I'm on the curb, so I have the extra height to be seen over their shoulders. It's like, yeah, this is a prime spot, man. And it worked out. And I'm going like, there I am. Ah! When they were shooting the film, I had a friend and I told him, I said, after the first shoot down in Atlanta, I said, man, this film is going to be amazing. They got everybody in it and this and that. And he looked at me in his typical cynical fashion. He goes, or it could be a huge flop. And then I started thinking, yeah, when you get that many stars into the mix, and I saw how Brock was having to rewrite things as he was going, and the direction didn't seem to, not Hal Needham's direction, but the direction of the film in general, didn't seem to be going the way Brock wanted it to go. And he seemed a little unhappy about it. So I was like, yeah, I think he may be right. We have to see how this plays out. Of course, it came out and it was like, it got pretty much panned. And, because it was this huge Hollywood production and the whole bit. But it became this cult film. And it really picked up a following, especially with the college kids and the frat boys and, the whole bit. And that's basically how it's survived all these years, is because people saw it when they were in college. And, for the younger kids, if you haven't seen it and you get a chance to, whether it comes up, I doubt it'll be on Netflix, but if, like your local art house is showing it, go check it out. It's a good time. Don't expect high art. It's just kind of like go and forget about everything and just enjoy it.
Going somewhere in a hurry, ma'am? Let me explain your options.
Never mind, I got this.
TheTicketClinic.com